Hello Internet, it's the Everythingist here. It's a beautiful fall day here in Michigan. Leaves are not quite starting to turn colors, but we're getting close. Anyway, I wanted to give a little context for today's video. It's a pretty academic topic, and people are like, who is this guy and why is he qualified to talk about these things? So just wanted to say real quick that my dissertation work, I did my PhD in physics education research, so studying teaching and learning in physics classes. And in order to be able to do that, there's a lot of human psychology that comes in, looking at things like cognitive science, neuropsychology, how the brain works, how people learn, how people think. And as a result of that, there's a lot of things that I've picked up along the way about motivation, what motivates people. This is really important in educational contexts, but for today's video, I wanted to turn it to something a little bit more fun and talk about gaming and how motivation affects the things that we do in the games we play, and particularly for Amazon's new world, which launches in 2 whole days. I'm so hype. Anyway, that's pretty much what I wanted to say. So I do kind of have a degree in this stuff, but I hope you enjoy the talk. So let's get to it.
Hello, Internet. Here we are. I want to do something a little bit different today and get into an academic analysis of Amazon's New World, and more specifically, looking at some of the psychological aspects that are underpinning the game design and gameplay decisions that Amazon has made. So I want to look at what motivates people and how the game design of New World is really well set up to take advantage of what we know about the psychology of human motivation. So with that, let's get right into it. I first want to point out that there are two different kinds of people. And if you're reading this and saying, okay, what's the other part? Well, then I guess you know which kind you are. But anyway, there are two kinds of motivation. In very broad terms, we break motivation into intrinsic motivation. So this is a motivator that is inseparable from the activity being considered, where as a natural consequence of doing the activity, this motivation always comes along for the ride. And that is in contrast to extrinsic motivation, which is a motivator or a set of motivators that are applied to or attached to the activity, but can be separated from it. And as an example here, an extrinsic motivation for exercising, for example, might be that you want to look good. You want to have that beach body or whatever. And that motivation is extrinsic because it can be separated from the actual act of exercising. But on the other hand, if you're one of those like dopamine junkies who is like, I exercise and I get high and it feels good. Yeah, sweat, suffer. That's an intrinsic motivation. That's something that cannot be divorced from doing the activity itself. And often these extrinsic motivators, whether this is seeking a positive reward or avoiding a negative stimulus, it's in order to attain something, to get something that you want, or to avoid something that you don't want. And when we're looking at extrinsic motivation in this way, you can think of it as ultimately obtaining rewards or avoiding punishments. Those are the sort of clinical terms that you'll see in the academic discourse on this topic. And while extrinsic motivation is interesting and it's very, very important for studying the reasons that people do things that they do, it is really only one component of what motivates people. And in the context of massively multiplayer online role-playing games, or really just video games in general, or even just games in general, this argument is done to death. Hey, look, I made my players hit the lever so that they got the reward, and they're just going to keep doing it over and over and over because we're just dumb animals and it's stimulus response conditioning. And I learned that when I hit the lever, I get a reward, so I keep hitting the lever. And that's true. I mean, that's not wrong. It is, however, oversimplifying the issue, and it's not the thing that I want to talk about today. I want to talk about intrinsic motivation. So not worrying about so much of the conditioning, stimulus response, reward chasing, carrot on stick business. There are interesting discussions about that out there. I encourage you to seek them out. I want to talk about the thing that is less discussed often, which is to say, what about the game design and what about the gameplay and the decisions that the game creators made are leveraging intrinsic motivators, the things that make people say, I just wanted to do it. I felt like it. It seemed, I don't know, fun. I heard that's kind of a thing for games. Anyway, the topic of fun, that's way more than we could possibly get into in, any one short presentation. And there are a lot of components to what makes activities fun beyond just motivation. There are considerations of personality. What sort of personality traits do you have? There's prior experience. There's the issue of your community and your social circles. There's even matters like, what is your moral system? Do you believe that playing a certain type of game is intrinsically wrong morally? So all of these factors come together in order to get at this idea of fun, and motivation is one part of that larger set of variables that helps to explain what we do and don't enjoy. So, with that sort of disclaimer out of the way of this is just one slice of a very interesting and complex problem, there's still some good knowledge to be gained by looking at the intrinsic motivation design of any game, but certainly New World in this case. And the theoretical framework that I want to use for discussing intrinsic motivation in this context is called self-determination theory, often abbreviated SDT. I say theoretical framework in the sense that it is a theory, it is a description of how the world works that is supported by a large body of evidence that has been tested many times in experimental settings and has been found to be very broadly supported by the evidence that is available. So I'm not using theory in the general parlance, vernacular English sense of, oh yeah, I think I know what's happening here. I have a theory. No, I actually mean that this is a testable and, for that matter, falsifiable scientific way of describing the world that has been tested many times and is found to be consistent with the evidence that we have. All right, so there's my science preach out of the way for today. The two founders, really, of self-determination theory are Richard Ryan and Edward Deci, and they truly are the OGs in the field of motivation. If you are going to study motivation in a scientific way, you're probably going to come across their work. How ridiculous are they? They are so broadly impactful that they have 800,000 citations for their research work, which is to say that other people doing psychology, there are 800,000 published works that call out these two guys and say, hey, that work that they did was important for the work that I'm about to do now. It's just completely bonkers. Like, okay, I'm not exactly a prolific publisher, but I think my most popular work has like 10 citations. So, a little sense of scale there. But anyway, um, there are a few papers in particular that I have used as references while working on this presentation. And here's some more info. Some of it is behind paywalls, but I've really tried to provide at least one or two sources that are accessible to the public without having to do any weird sleuthing about. So feel free to follow up on those if you're interested in more. All right, topic at hand. Finally, here we are, self-determination theory. This is a big one. This is used in game design, it's used in academic study, it's used in business, it's used in economics for that matter. And the core tenet, like if I had to distill this very broad and successful theory into a single slide, because here we are, it's that there are three main components of intrinsic motivation. The first one is autonomy, which is sometimes also referred to as agency. And this is the idea that people are in control of their own actions. That if a person is autonomous, that they have agency to make their own decisions and to make meaningful decisions, they will find that to be motivating. And that there will be greater motivation when a person has more autonomy and more meaningful decision-making power. The second component of intrinsic motivation is competence or mastery, which is the idea that if you get better at something, that is going to provide motivation. An important caveat here is that there are lots of things that we do that we get better at that we're not particularly motivated to do. And in order for the motivation to be strong here, there needs to be a self-awareness of the increase in competence that one can actually perceive and realize that I am getting better at this. And that can be obfuscated in certain cases, or worse, when you're working on a really, really long-term goal. Think of something like learning a language or engaging in a really long-term lifestyle change, fitness regime, diet, anything like that. Over the time scale of weeks to months to years, that gradual progress can get lost, and it's easy to say, oh, I'm not getting better, and then you lose motivation. So there are ways of dealing with that. That's, I guess, getting a bit off topic. The third one, though, is relatedness or belongingness. And there are two different aspects of this that are relevant to the topic at hand. One is the idea of social relatedness, that a person belongs to a group, is part of a community, that the thing that they're doing has some sort of meaning or impact to other human beings. That's one side of it. The other side of it, though, I might also use the word relevance, which is to say that the task or the activity at hand is related to something else that the person also cares about. That type of relatedness is important to intrinsic motivation as well. So there's both, again, the social interpersonal connection, relatedness, the idea of belonging to a group, and then there's also the idea of this activity matters to other things. And that's self-determination theory. So there you go. There's 40 years worth of academic work. These guys started in like the late 70s, early 80s, and 2 minutes later, now you understand everything, which of course is not true. What I will say though is that to when you get to a place where an activity leverages all three of these components of intrinsic motivation, it can be a very powerful motivator. And that's sort of the I win button of motivation, that I've created an activity or a task where people will have autonomy, where they will achieve competence and where they will feel that it is related to other people or other things that they care about. That's motivation. That's how you make it happen. How does this connect to New World? If we look at some of the game design decisions in New World, I'm not going to break down the entire game. I'm hoping people have a little background or interest here, but just to briefly go through it, the combat system is built on action combat rather than tap targeting, lots of hotkeys. There is a three-faction system in the world where every player must participate in one of three different factions that are in competition with each other. There are several different avenues of character customization. And in this case, I don't mean character customization like appearance, like the character creator, what's your name, what kind of facial hair do you have, what color tattoos do you have, not that sort of stuff, but mechanical character customization of being able to select different weapon combinations, being able to allocate attribute points freely among different attributes that your character has, about being able to mix and match gear freely to say, I want certain pieces of light, heavy, medium armor with different attributes with different perks. And the combination of all these things gives a huge diversity of character builds, which is really going to be interesting from a academic perspective as well as a gameplay perspective. There are lots of different ways to level up. And this is in contrast to some of the very traditional theme park games. You know, if we go all the way back to EverQuest, there was one thing to do, which was to kill mobs. That was how you advanced in the game. You want XP, you go kill mobs. As game design has evolved, we've gotten more ways to advance our characters, but even in many highly polished modern MMOs, there's really only one practical way to level up, which in theme park games is often questing. Like, sure, I could go into World of Warcraft and grind mobs forever, and that's not really viable. I'm not going to gain XP at nearly the rate that makes that activity seem worthwhile compared to going out and doing quests and being funneled through the content hoops that the game designers wanted. But in New World, we can gather and get lots of character XP. We can craft and get lots of character XP. You can do town board missions, you can do faction missions. You can actually grind mobs and get quite efficient XP if you have a good AoE grinding build. Lots of different ways to advance your character. There is the land ownership aspect, and there are two levels of this. There is the individual housing ownership, which is great, and there is at the company level territory ownership. There is content for different group sizes. There's meaningful solo content, solo PvP and solo PvE. There is small group content, there is large group content. It is certainly too early in the game's life cycle to see how the balance of these things is going to change over time and what the quote unquote true end game will be. Surprise, it's going to be fashion. Uh, but anyway, at the moment, it really does seem like whether you want to play by yourself or with a small group or with a large group, there is meaningful content for you to engage in. And the economy itself is almost entirely player driven, more so than the giants like WoW, like Final Fantasy XIV, like Guild Wars 2, Elder Scrolls Online, because all of those have many vendor NPCs, and New World really doesn't. There's your faction vendor. You can buy stuff. You can buy stuff with faction tokens, but you can't sell the gear that you make or the gear that you loot except to other players. You can't just go out and buy food from a tavern NPC. You have to get it from other players. And along those lines, there really are multiple ways to progress your character that do combine to make you ultimately more powerful, more impactful in the world. But there is an entire crafting progression path, gathering progression path, player level, but weapon masteries as well. Your character level and your mastery of different weapons are independent of each other. And looking at all of this put together, the exercise that I would like to put to you as the viewer is to say, here, with all of these different components of the game design, thinking about this through the lens of self-determination theory, where does the intrinsic motivation in New World come from? Again, I'm not worried about extrinsic motivation. Yes, I whacked on a loot pinata for a whole bunch of time, and then loot came out, and it's wonderful. Yeah, sure, whatever. That's fine. That's true. That's cool. That's not the topic here. The topic here is based on the way the game is designed and based on the way players are expected to interact with the game world, what are the intrinsically motivating factors for these different components of the game? So at this point, I'm going to pause. I'm going to let you think about this for a minute. Do a little bit of matching. Go through this list and say which of these leverages autonomy, which one of these leverages competence, which one of these leverages relatedness, and see what you come up with. So I'm actually going to hold tight for a minute and just let you think about that. Don't worry, the video's not frozen or anything. We're just going to take a bit and think. So take a bit and think. If you'd like more time to chew on this before I give away the answer, feel free to pause the video and then resume when you want to check your work, as we say. So here we go. Here's a solution. And I do mean a solution, not the solution. This is the breakdown that I was able to make sense of as I was working through this and considering it myself. But there are arguments to be made that, of course, these things don't always break down exactly into very clean categories. There can be overlap, there can be ambiguity. So your answers might be slightly different for a very good reason. Anyway, here we go. Action combat. This is about building competence at a level that is higher than, or I'll say deeper than maybe, what you get in a sort of tab target hotkey based MMO, because there is the knowledge of how the game system works, but there's also just the physical execution, getting the timing, working on things like animation canceling, like roll dodge sheath canceling to maintain higher movement speeds. And these activities do require a level of physical coordination, dexterity, timing, and that is something that you, the person, not just you, the character, will get better at over the course of playing the game. Now, I would actually personally argue that at very high levels of gameplay in something like Final Fantasy XIV, for example, which is heavily hotkey based, there is still this competence mastery aspect in that knowing what all of your abilities are and having worked out sort of the piano playing skills of with these 30, 40 hotkeys, what's exactly the right thing to do at the right time. There's certainly a level of skill to be had there. That said, the just sort of the physicality of the combat in New World does, I think, elevate this to a higher level. The three faction system, always or continuing to work through sort of the easy ones. This is all about belonging to something. This is saying like, I'm Covenant, I'm a Marauder, I'm Syndicate. These are my people. This is who I fight for. This is the faction that becomes more powerful and more impactful and more visible in the world as a result of my actions. I do things and that matters to someone. The character customization, this is where we start to see multiple components of intrinsic motivation coming together. There is the autonomy aspect of how do I want to build my character? What type of weapons do I want to use? How am I going to allocate my stats? Do I want to be more tanky, more agile? Do I want to be a glass cannon? And that's not tied in a very fixed way to set job designs as it is in other games or class designs. Instead, you can say, oh, what if I had a little bit of this and also some of that? We're seeing a really, really wide diversity of builds already as people have been playing through things in the beta. So the autonomy here, the ability to make your own decisions about how you want your character to be and having those decisions be meaningful, that's really great. There's also the aspect of I'm getting better with these builds as I play with them. And there is, of course, it's a role-playing game. You know, we project ourselves onto our characters, we project our characters onto ourselves, and as your character levels up in all of these different things, you do, to a certain extent, take that as a part of you and say, oh, look, I'm getting better with all these things. And speaking of variety, you actually get to choose, what do I want to do today? And for people who play a lot of sandbox games, you're very used to this. For people who are primarily playing theme park MMOs or say like heavily story-driven single-player games, you often don't really have that choice about what happens next. There's really only one choice for what happens next very often in more linear games. But at any given time, you can be like, all right, well, I want to level up. Do I want to do it by crafting, by gathering, by PvPing, by going into expeditions, by grinding mobs, by engaging in all of these different kinds of game content that are rewarding? So there's autonomy there, which is, again, you're actually making your own decisions and they're meaningful. But there's also this relatedness aspect that what you're doing is relevant and that it connects to the other gameplay systems and the other people playing the game. One of the things that is great about New World is that there's so much content in the open world. There's very little instance content, and that means that what you're going to do is going to impact and be impacted by other players, and that you can adapt your gameplay in real time based on what's going on in the world around you. It's not the same ritual every day of log in, run my heroic dungeon, get a shiny, log out. So that's pretty cool. Land ownership, likewise, there is the aspect of relatedness of saying, my company owns territory in the world. What we're doing impacts everybody who plays on our server. That's really cool. There's also the housing aspect of I belong to a town, like I'm part of a community in a physical way, physical within the game world, to say that other people can see my house, they can enter my house, I can show trophies from the different adventures that I've gone on, things that I've gathered and crafted, and it is really a great system for driving player interaction and feeling like we're connected to each other as people on a server together. And there's also the decision-making aspect of what territories might my company like to go for? Where will I buy a house? There are actually mechanical consequences in the game for where you choose your house. It affects things like travel times, like storage, travel costs, rather, not travel times. Although time is money, friend. Okay, this is where it really kind of goes into the deep end. The rest of these, we'll just get this out of the way here. There's so many intrinsic motivators built into the the different aspects of the game design. I'm probably going on a bit long, so I won't exhaustively detail every single thing, but I hope you're starting to get the idea that as we look at the different aspects of the game, it's not just about here's your shiny, hit the lever again. The factors that intrinsically motivate human beings are very well aligned with a lot of the gameplay factors, game design decisions that are built into New World. And that's really exciting because at the end of the day, if all you have is extrinsic motivation, people get tired of that. They say, ugh, I'm so tired of chasing the carrot on the stick. Like, I don't want to do it anymore. You lose the fun when the only motivator is extrinsic. People want to feel like they're in control of themselves. This is a very basic human psychological thing. And if you're always being forced to engage with content in a certain way because the game designer said that's where the shinies live, then you're going to tire of it. So if we want this game to succeed, if we want to say, yeah, I'm going to be part of New World for a long time and I'm going to play with my friends and meet people and have a great time exploring this new world, then we need to make sure that there's a lot of intrinsic motivation to be had as well as reward systems built within the game. So having said all that, I think that when you go through this list and you start thinking about which aspects of the game design leverage which types of intrinsic motivation, that New World succeeds in ways that many other modern MMOs do not, in terms of having many different kinds of in-game activities that leverage different types of intrinsic motivation. This bodes well for the future of the game in competing against other MMOs and succeeding in attracting a player base and in growing that player base, as long as there's still fun to be had. Because as I said way back at the start, motivation is very important, but it's not the only thing that determines fun. There's all these other aspects of human psychology as well that will influence how much people enjoy the game and how much they choose to engage with it, what the persistence is. But we're off to a good start. From a design point of view, there's a lot to make people want to play this game. So yeah, hopefully I'll see you there. Thanks for putting up with me as I go on a little bit of a academic rant down the rabbit hole of how people think and how that influences we play games. If you found this interesting, please let me know, thumbs up, like, comment, subscribe, smash the bell, all that stupid stuff. I would be more than happy to hear what you have to say and what you might be interested in hearing about next. So, thanks for your time and thanks for your attention. I hope to see you in Eternum.